Hello, you're listening to Storytelling Saga, the podcast that shares stories. I'm your host, Allie, and this week I'm excited to welcome Shauna McGarry to the podcast. Shauna is a TV writer and producer whose credits include Bajillion Dollar Properties, Craig of the Creek, Tuca Bertie, and BoJack Horseman. Welcome, Shauna.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So I wanted to first start by asking you, when did you know you wanted to pursue a career in writing for television? And then how did you go about getting an agent?
Well, they happen very far apart. I've known for a long time. I went to film school. I always loved TV growing up, but old movies too. And I sort of had this ritual after school, depending on the day. Like I would either watch Northern Exposure or Happy Days or some TV show like that they used to play on repeat on some like A&E or something, or I would watch Turner Classic Movies or AMC American Movie Classics. And I was just obsessed. And my mom had always been like a hobbyist writer. She had grown up in Los Angeles, so sort of knew about the universe of it all. And so she had written a couple spec scripts and things. But yeah, so I went to film school. I went to New York University. And I just always kind of leaned more towards writing. And I actually still have this to-do list from that time where I had written like graduate, become a writer's assistant. So, and I just sort of did it. I mean, I moved to LA really quickly after college. I worked as an assistant to two directors I still really admire, Mike Mills and Miranda July. I had met Miranda my senior year of school, and I invited her to show her first movie at a festival that I helped produce at NYU, and so we kept in touch. But that didn't pay a ton because they didn't need a full-time assistant. So in the meantime, I nannied. No one ever liked, I'm not that they don't like this story, but it's not as like cool as you think. But I nannied for a long time. And one of the people I nannied for eventually got me an interview to be a writer's PA, essentially a writer's assistant. And from there, I got that job, and then I worked my way up. And how I got my agent, so I had been a writer's assistant for 7 years, and I was working for this guy, Bruce Helford. I worked with him on a pilot that didn't end up going, and he had promised me that whatever his next thing went that actually became a real TV show, he would staff me, which is sort of, unless you have some runaway hit play, or you're like a Twitter star, or like all these different ways you hear about people kind of getting into the business without working their way up through the assistant route. As an assistant, what you need is that executive producer, showrunner, TV show creator to kind of like give you that first hand through the door, So for me, it was Bruce. And so he agreed to staff me on his next show, which ended up being Anger Management, which is not a show I stand by necessarily, like creatively, or what my style or my voice is. But it was my stepping block, So I was staffed on that show. I was a staff writer. It was one of these shows that was like a 10-90. So instead of doing a pilot, we did 10 episodes, and then we're signed on to do 90. So I was there for 100 episodes. And he basically told his agent team, I'm hiring Shauna, you should represent her. So for a while I was with that junior agent at UTA. And, it's a hard thing. Getting agents is a really hard thing. And I think one of the harder things about it is they have to kind of like want you, they have to pursue you in a way sometimes. I mean, or else they're never going to feel like they won something, And so my agents at UTA didn't have to do that with me. And I think as a result of that, after Anger Management, my career kind of stalled out a little bit. But I met with a manager who now represents me, Jenny Trish Cooper, who I love. She got me my next gig after Anger Management. And eventually I had worked enough to kind of feel confident to, leave UTA, who, again, like, they're not bad agents, but I think if an agent never wanted you really in the first place, you just were sort of given to them, it's hard for them to for you to be the client they're fighting for. So then, because I had worked for a bit, then I was being pursued by other agents, and so I made a move to Verve. But it wasn't like this easy, it wasn't like this wonderful kismet like thing right at the beginning.
And I wanted to ask you too about, in particular, the series Bajillion Dollar Properties, which is, it's, for anyone who doesn't know, it's a parody of Million Dollar Listing and Property Brothers. I was checking out some clips. It's just so funny. Like, oh my God, it's just really funny. And so I just wanted to ask you, how was that experience working on that series? Since I'm sure different being than, say, a network or a cable show with it being kind of a web series. So, like, how does that differ in that sense?
Yeah, well, that show was mostly improvised. We would write really detailed outlines and try to come up with, most of the writing staff were students of the Upright Citizens Brigade theater, so we all had taken all those classes. That was our system of setting up improv games, you know. Kulap Valisak, who ran that show, she's an incredibly detail-oriented, fastidious person, so she wanted to be as prepared as possible so that we could create an environment for the actors, the improvisers, to have as much fun and make it as easy for them to be weird and say whatever came into their brain as possible. So basically we would spend about, it was kind of like writing any other TV show, but instead of writing scenes or getting sent off to write script, we would arc out sort of a general idea for different things that could happen during the season, a lot of different characters that the agents could run into based on both like just ideas we had or actors we knew we could get to be different buyers. And we would write these like 2 to 3 page sort of synopses with like example jokes for the actors if that helped them, what their emotional drive was, like in getting in this game that they were about to play. But I really can't take credit for a lot of it because we really just did have brilliant improvisational actors on that show too. And then we would film so long, like a scene you might watch with like Paul F. Tompkins and the other realtors might have been shot for like an hour, you know, like that they're just going off. And then it was really cool up and the editors who would then craft it into like a scene that kind of had a beginning, middle, and end and like made any sort of sense. So yeah, it was like it was a stepped out process of writing.
Also, I wanted to ask you about the series Craig of the Creek on Cartoon Network. So would you say with that show in particular, do you find it easier or more challenging writing a kid's show compared to, say, an adult series?
I think they're similar. You know, I think good shows all come out of characters and what those characters are afraid of or what they want. You know, the challenge with Craig the Creek and other children's shows like that are you only have 11 minutes. So everything just has to be slimmed down. You have to really get to like the bare bones of what you're trying to express sometimes. But the 2 guys who run that show, Ben Levin and Matt Burnett, are just amazing and have such an amazing, such a clear understanding and really hilarious view of dialogue and story. They both were the writers on Steven Universe for a long time before they started Craig. So, I mean, it's always hard, but you're always just going back to like, well, what are we saying this character wants this episode? And I think the harder thing for me about kids TV is, well, for kids, it's a bit like Bajillion. It's more of a collaborative writing process. So you write outlines with a lot of dialogue examples, but then the storyboard artists take it and they kind of do the step 2 of the writing process. They're the ones writing the dialogue as they storyboard the show. And then as a writer of the episode, you get the storyboards back and you get to pitch on jokes and add things to it. Whereas adult animation or adult live action, usually you get to go off and write a draft, and you have that one step of autonomy and that one step of ownership that on children's TV you don't really get.
So then shifting gears now, I want to talk about Tuca and Bertie. So that's such a wonderful show. I'm very happy that it's been picked up for a season 2 on Adult Swim now. And
Thank you.
So, yes, so you wrote, of course, the Annie Award-winning episode, The Jelly Lakes. Such a wonderful episode. And there's so much in that episode with, for instance, the beginning with Tuca and Bertie reconciling, and then, of course, Bertie facing her trauma in that episode. It's such a deep, emotional, lovely episode. So just with that episode in particular, what was your favorite part or just like the process of writing that episode for you?
Well, Tuca and Bertie is just such a joy to write. Every episode is such a joy. We have a really great team on that show. We had one for season 1. We have one for season 2. Tuca and Bertie both are such characters that are incredibly nothing's easy, but their character definitions are so well drawn that it's really easy to always know their point of view or guess it or work towards it with just grace, because Lisa set up such good characters. I just really love in every episode finding the things that are sort of weird, that are maybe slightly secret. Like in the Jelly Lakes, it's not that obvious because we didn't want to make it obvious. That was part of the point. But you don't hear one male voice through the whole episode. So writing the show without men in it was an idea that we had pretty early on, and I really loved. So this idea of them going away allowed for that in a bit, because we didn't have to have Speckle there. The road trip idea had been on the board since the beginning, and all it said on this card that Lisa had put up was road trip. So, as writers, you kind of write yourself into corners. Like we had gotten them in this fight in episode 8, and so it was sort of about bringing them back together, because the show ultimately, we never want it to be the conflict between Tuca and Bertie as much as Tuca and Bertie against the world. So, yeah, I just really loved this idea of a lake house. I love the idea of there being these older mentor-like influences on them as they're kind of finding out and discovering more about themselves, like these almost projected potential futures. Isabella Rossellini's character at Pat, the owl, like being somebody that Tuca could sort of be. She teaches Tuca how to like express herself through art, as much as like that's not something we lingered on too long, but that was really important to me. And the interactions they have with like the teenagers in the mall and then in the lake was also something really important to me. I really love that intergenerational connection that episode has. And so that was a lot of the stuff that I was excited to kind of write about.
That's wonderful. I didn't even realize that on a conscious level, that there's no male voices in that particular episode. It's really interesting to me. And I'm excited for season 2 for sure. So that's very exciting.
Yeah, season 2 is so good. It really picks off running. Like everything that was zany about the show and made it such a different experience. Like we just like leaned full into it. And just to say about the Jelly Lakes, like the mature themes of it, the ideas of a woman reckoning with her child abuse was something that was important for Lisa to have in the show, but she also never wanted it to be that Bertie was a victim, or because Bertie went through this as a kid, that's why she has anxiety now. Like I think her major goal is to be like, you can have all these different layers to you and also have this thing that happened to you in the past, and certainly it informs it, but it's not, her childhood trauma isn't necessarily why she's going through this thing with Pastry Pete, but of course there are those tenuous connections. And she just also never wanted the show to be about that, which is why we started the show being about their friendship and this fight that they're in, and it's just sort of surprises you 3/4 of the way through that, oh, this is what Bertie's been experiencing this whole time. That was very much on purpose, because we didn't want it to be like, well, this is the episode where we really dive into Bertie's reason why she's all the way she is. It's just hopefully one layer of like a cake that Bertie would make.
It's definitely well balanced with the levity and the wackiness that we love in the show, and then getting to this trauma with Bertie. So it's definitely it's so well done. And then, of course, the ending with Bertie just kind of, when she like swims through the lake to, what is it, the Peanut Island or whatever it was, like that's just so, like that victory, it's just such a like lovely thing to see, like as an audience watching it.
Yeah, well, that's the amazing thing about TV, right? And movies is you can add structure to kind of a amorphous, large idea and like weird, subtle problems and nuances. But like if you just have her have this very concrete goal, which is to get to this island, kind of stand in for all these other things she's going through, it allows you to have these heightened moments and these stakes, and it feel like an action adventure almost for a second, when really what you're trying to talk about are all these other sort of more challenging things. But yeah, thanks. That was really fun. This idea of her racing to the island.
Okay, and now I want to talk about BoJack Horseman. How did you become a writer in particular on the show?
Well, I had written for Tuca and Bertie the first season, and I think they liked me enough that then they asked me to write on BoJack Horseman.
Oh, cool. And so was it kind of intimidating or exciting coming into it, since that was the final season?
Yeah, both. I mean, I think Raphael is one of the smartest writers we have working right now. He's just brilliant. I love BoJack. all the writers on the show were incredibly smart and funny in different ways. It's always intimidating, but then also you work long enough, you understand that there's a certain amount of same mold that happens when a writer's room has been together a long time. So I kind of understood going in that I would be like a new voice and a new perspective, and that's always needed and a good thing, and I really trusted that group of people by the time I did it. Like, I already had worked with Lisa, I had worked with Raphael to a certain extent because he's an EP on Tuca and Bertie. One of the writers worked on both shows, Nick Adams.
Yeah. Cool. So first off, so you wrote, of course, The Face of Depression and Angela. So Face of Depression, honestly, that's one of my favorites of the first half of season 6. There's so much going on in that episode. First off, I wanted to ask you to start out with the character of Maud. We're introduced to Maud in that episode, so Todd and Maud, I love that. So who came up with Maud? I'm curious to know. Like the name even, too. It's just great. The rhyming.
Oh gosh, do I remember that? Todd in season 6 was interesting and hard kind of the whole way through because he's such an irreverent character and he's such a comic relief and so silly and sweet. And we really wanted to do justice for him as a character and give him a certain arc. At first we were talking a lot, and it's possible Allison or Nick talked about this. We were talking a lot about investigating deeper into his heredity and his family, which kind of does come somewhat in the second season for sure. Him getting back in touch with his mom and his stepfather being Chavez. But we did want to also take into account and really deliver on this idea that he was asexual. And we wanted episode 7, is that the episode it was? We wanted whatever Face of Depression was to feel almost like an alternate ending. Like, if you wanted to, you could end the series after that episode and probably be pretty happy. If you wanted that happy version of where things could end up for BoJack, he starts somewhere new. Todd gets a love. If you're following it closely, Princess Carolyn and Judah are reunited, even though we haven't gotten them together all the way yet. There's all these good things that end up happening in that episode. So for Todd, it really was this, even though his romantic pursuits hadn't really ended up anywhere in the past, now we were giving him this person who was potentially perfect for him, maybe even too good to be true. But no, that was something I think we all came up with together. I really loved the idea of her being really close to Todd, being silly in all the ways Todd is silly, that they would speak their a similar language. And I think we came up with the joke of Cinnabunny before we even came up. And then it was sort of and then she should be a bunny, so I think that's how it happened.
That's so cute, because they really are just so perfect for each other, the two of them, so that's really cute. And you know what, that's funny you bring that up, because this was something I was going to ask you too about how you could consider it to be an endpoint of the series. Because some people, in fact, do kind of prefer, this is the perfect ending, because, in particular, we have with the final scene in that episode of BoJack finding solace when he goes to that Old Town Horseburg reenactment, and with him just do you agree with that it should be the ending, or just that's a good endpoint for the character?
I like where we ended the show. I'm on the side of, we're really trying to investigate with BoJack a man who is neither good or bad. You just do good or bad things, like Diane says to him early on in the show. And I think it was due that things started to come back to him. We watch him do a lot of really kind of selfish, blurred line actions throughout the series. And if we had ended it at episode 7, I don't know, I don't think it would have been fair to all the women that he's mistreated in the show and all that. But I do think we did want to make a point to say this is a man who has deep relationships, or a horseman who has deep relationships with those in his life, and at the end of the day, he does know how to love them. He can love them, and he can choose to love them sometimes when he's at his healthiest place. And I think that's the truth for all of us, right? So we could do that on our best day. We can treat our family just how we want to treat them, and we can tell our best friend how much they mean to us, and then the next day we might be going through something that doesn't allow for us to be that version of ourselves. And so that's what's kind of cool about episodic television, is you can explore all those different days in a person's life. And So I'm glad it's not the ending, but I'm glad it allows for this period to do exactly that, just like show BoJack's grace, and it's not an accident that I think I was the one to write it. Like, I definitely tend to write a little sentimentally. I definitely am like the earnest kind of comedy writer in the room sometimes, which I think Raphael thinks is really funny. So, if anything, we had to pull back. Raphael probably had to pull back the sweetness of BoJack in that episode. So, yeah. Does that answer the question?
Oh, definitely, yeah. I appreciate just hearing like the insight behind it as well too. And to that point too, with BoJack, I also wanted to ask you about the scene between BoJack and Mr. Peanut Butter when he finally gives him his crossover episode. That's my favorite scene between those two characters. It's so pure and sweet. And so I wanted to ask you in particular with that scene, were there discussions basically of how kind of sincere BoJack would be with that, or was he just kind of humoring Mr. Peanut Butter? Like, what are your thoughts in particular with that scene?
I think that was one of the earlier ones we came up with. I was really in love with the idea of that. I really love museums, which is why you have like the Smithsonian in there, and you have Horseburg, like those reenactment sort of things at the end. Like, anytime I can kind of fit in places of culture or like, as a backdrop, I love it so much. So we had this idea about the Smithsonian pretty early on, and we thought it was funny that just as like a repeated pattern joke of the show, that like Mr. Peanut Butter would have a huge exhibit,
Mm-hmm.
and BoJack would have nothing but like the sweater, So I think that was the first joke that kind of came from all that. And then as we were talking about the fact that it's like the whole Mr. Peanut Butter set,
Yeah.
then it like became pretty funny that this idea of like, oh my God, BoJack could guest star, and then oh my God, that's the crossover episode, as sort of a button to that joke. If anything, it's almost like I like it that it's in that episode, but it's almost too perfect. You know what I mean? Like, it meant we just could never make that joke again on this show. I mean, you kill the joke basically by finally having it happen.
That's true. I guess that's why it's fitting, though, that it's in the final season, of course. But yeah.
Right.
But then also the button's so funny because the whole thing with Mr. Peanut Butter, since he's on that Face of Depression tour, and then the people, it's like, oh, he's the face of depression, like when he's crying. So it's just so, like, that's why I love it. That's so hysterical. Another funny moment I just love in the episode, just I want to point out, is when Ruthie is walking and then Princess Carolyn gets emotional and then he's like, oh, it's okay, she sucks now, but she'll get better at it. Oh my God, I love that.
Thank you.
And also with that episode, Diane, we see her with the physical change of her gaining weight. How did that come about too? I'm just curious to know, with changing her appearance and then in a sense, in doing so, making it that she is in a way more comfortable with herself and with her relationship with Guy and with her writing and everything like that.
Yeah, well, it was a layered kind of evolution of all those things, talking about all those things, like her depression, her writing. Raphael had an idea that she gained weight through antidepressants from the beginning. I think he wanted that to happen. I think where he wasn't clear, and like why you have a writer's room to like help you get through this stuff, is like whether or not that makes her upset, or whether or not that's a good thing or a bad thing. Does it really help her writing? How does Guy feel about it? All that stuff. And I think what was important to me was that it was just this thing that happened. Like, I didn't want her to suddenly be this character that cares a lot about her weight, or like that was some terrible, the worst thing that could happen after you take antidepressants is that you gain weight. I mean, if we cared less about that as a society, who the fuck cares? Like, you're not depressed anymore. And so I think we wanted her to come to her own kind of feeling of happiness. To describe happiness, just not as completely kind of in her own cyclical kind of depressive cycle that she's in the whole episode. And she does that by finally like giving into the fact that she might need medical modification, and at the end, it was a really big discussion in the room when Guy gets off the airplane, like whether he smiles first and then she smiles, or if she smiles first and then he smiles, because I didn't want it to be like she was asking his permission, like, is it okay that I'm chubby now, So yeah, we talked about that stuff a lot. And then I really love that just for the rest of the season, she just is this larger version of herself. But it doesn't make Guy go away. It doesn't make her spiral. If anything, she just continues on a path to becoming healthier mentally. So yeah, I mean, we talked about it a lot, and I wish more shows would, you know, I mean, I'm a person of size. I always have been. So it's important to me that when you're portraying that kind of stuff, it's not the dramatic conflict. You know, that the conflict isn't whether or not she's getting fat or gaining weight or losing weight. I think so much you have an overweight person or a fat person, or however, I mean, there's so many ways to describe them on a show. That's like the main internal problem. That's the character trait. And that's really not a character trait most of the time in a daily life, you know? So it was a hard thing to talk about as a room, because it's a hard thing to kind of, we're not used to talking about our bodies, you know, to each other in a way that's like open and vulnerable. And so yeah, it was kind of an amazing experience, honestly.
That's wonderful, yes, and very well said too. Like what you said, if it's helping you, that's all that's important. So that definitely absolutely comes through with Diane, like when she holds up the sign to Guy and we just see how like she's glowing and she's like a new person and she's confident and happy. So it's just really beautifully done.
Thanks. Well, yeah, I think the animators worked really hard on that smile. Word is that Raphael made them redraw it like a million times because he wanted it to be perfect. But yeah.
And so now to talk about the other episode you wrote, Angela. So first I wanted to ask you, there's so many great things, but to still talk about Diane. So in that episode, we see really the last interaction between Diane and Mr. Peanut Butter with that phone call between them. And then with her saying how, oh, if we met each other now, things would be different between us. And then Mr. Peanut Butter saying, yeah, but then we wouldn't be the people we are now. I'm just curious to know, because this just like kind of came to me, were there discussions of, even though I personally wouldn't have liked this, but were there discussions of possibly getting Diane and Mr. Peanut Butter back together, or was that just never like an option?
No, I don't think that was ever a consideration. I think if you want to look at the last season as a whole, like that last Diane BoJack conversation could also be sort of said for Mr. Peanut Butter and Diane, which is like people are supposed to come into your life for a certain amount of time and they change it and they make you better, or they don't, but they impact you, and then they might not continue to be a part of your life, and that's okay. I think that was sort of the same philosophy we had with Mr. Peanut Butter and Diane. And Mr. Peanut Butter's journey, you know, and it's a show with so many characters. So sometimes we'll have these whole plot machinations and write out draft after draft of things. So I apologize if I don't quite remember, but there were lots of talks about Mr. Peanut Butter. And then of course, sometimes what makes it to the screen is less, you know, like we're expecting the audience to connect the dots maybe more than what's on the page. But in our writers' minds, what Mr. Peanut Butter really had to do was be by himself, because from season 1 we only see him with other people, right? He's a codependent person. That he's a dog, you know. He's like his tongue is out, you know. He's friendly. He wants to be around you. He wants to make everyone else happy, but he's not really listening. That was the whole thing with Diane, with the Beauty and the Beast house. So this idea that he's written a book, a memoir, the irony of that he's not an intellectual at all, and it's so easy to him and so hard and torturous for Diane, and that's really a reflection on all of us in the writer's room, like to write, you know. But being self-reflective enough that he could write a memoir is like a big step for Mr. Peanut Butter, you know. And I have to give credit to Raphael for a lot of the dialogue in that scene. I mean, BoJack Horseman as a series is Raphael Bob Waxberg's baby and his vision, and so a lot of the time we'll talk a lot about what a scene can be between two people, and then that line you referenced, I'm pretty sure that's a Raphael line, and yeah, so just having that final sort of hello and goodbye from them, you know, like Diane, Mr. Peanut Butter hasn't heard anything from Diane about the fact that she's like dating somebody else or what the state of her relationship is, and she doesn't know what's going on with him. So it's a catch-up call, but also, do they really need to know that stuff about each other because they had this relationship in the past and they can connect on that level, and that's its own thing, and that's cool too, you know. So yeah, I don't think we ever thought they would get together again. I think we liked Guy. We wanted her to be with somebody who was good for her, you know. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I love, Guy is perfect for her, so Guy's just amazing. And
Yeah.
so also in that episode, we have Princess Carolyn and Judah getting together, and that scene is so sweet too, with him professing his love to her through song. So I'm curious to know how that came about in terms of finding the way he would confess to her. Did you always talk about it being through song, or were there other ways, or just was that always going to be the case?
I think I really loved the idea that Judah has all these weird side things going that he never brings into his professional life, you know? Like in Face of Depression, I had him be a cyclist because I thought that would be hilarious. I have a friend who's like became obsessed with cycling, and he's a movie executive, you know, and it's these two very different parts of his life, but he cycles everywhere now. And I thought that was super funny that Judah would ride his bike everywhere. So then it was the same thing for sort of the fact that he's in this band, right? And the fact that he would be, there was more at first. I think it didn't end up in the final draft, but that he would be like embarrassed to tell Princess Carolyn that he was in a band or that he wanted her to come because the idea is he does like her and he doesn't know how to like express that. But the last thing he would want is that she just show up at some like gross punk club and like have her witness his terrible band, you know? So yeah, I think it was something that just came up in the room, but I think I always love it when people are in bands or people are like crafting or like doing weird things and you can somehow fit that into the show. And then the song, Raphael wrote the lyrics to that song pretty quickly, like I think in a night. Like once we decided that he would play her a song, as opposed to like make some declaration of love, like verbally, yeah, we just all kind of fell in love with it. I mean, I really love the idea of having his hair down finally, you know? So all that stuff, it's just like you're in a room and you all pitch different little pieces and it just comes together that way.
And also, we have Todd reconciling with his mother in that episode. It's just so hilarious, though, then at the end, like with esteemed character actress Margot Martindale saying, oh, it's all come to this, of mother and son back together. So I'm curious to know, like, was that intentional, like, going into the start of the season, that it would end with Todd reconciling with his mother?
Yeah, that was something we definitely wanted. That was what we were trying to get to. It was a little out of nowhere because we had never dealt with his mother before in series other than like really early on in season 1. So it was a little hard because you have to kind of force the plot to go that way, right? You have to say, okay, we're focusing on this season and these are what the plot points are going to be. So yeah, that, and then deciding what the deal was with his mother was like a really long conversation in the writing room over and over again about like, well, is she a good mother? Like, why hasn't she reached out to Todd? Like, she's proud. She just thought he would come back, and now it's been so long. Like, we talked over and over and over again about so many different possibilities, and it's so funny, like, how most of it doesn't even end up in the script, you know? And then the Margot Martindale part of it, I just really wanted Margot Martindale in my episode. Like, I was just trying so hard to figure out how to get Margot Martindale in the episode. And we were trying to figure out this Todd storyline with his mom. And we knew it had to be kind of zany because it's Todd. And everything felt kind of like not right. And then I just went home one night and I was like, oh my God. He has Margot Martindale pretend to kidnap him because it would be like so perfect because it matched up with like how she was brought into the series in the first place, and it was crazy, you know, in this way that works. And so it was, I remember we'd been working on the Todd storyline forever, and like every day we had a new pitch on like what it could be, and every day I was like no. And then I just remember that night just being like, oh my God, this is what it is. And then I went in the next day, and it was like it was so fun because everyone was just like, oh my gosh, yes. And then you just pile on and you add and add. And then Raphael was so excited because it did loop back to that first appearance of Margot Martindale in the series, and the rock opera and all that stuff. And so the courtroom scene was his idea of her saying it all is one, you know, one journey, one story that was her story from the beginning that she was telling, and it doesn't make any sense really when you think about it, but it is really funny, a bookend to the whole thing. And then I also was super excited because I wanted somebody to run in and like cast her, and I was just and so we got Nicole Holofcener in the show too, which yeah, so that was it. It's mostly just me sometimes being like, what actress can I get in this show?
That's fantastic. Oh my goodness. So then we have like all of those lighter things, but then of course with the A story, it's such a horrifying thing with, oh my god, like with the conversation between Angela and BoJack signing away his rights with Horse and Arounds, and it becomes Around. And then I love the quote when she says, "It's funny, isn't it? The things that matter. The truth is none of it matters, and the truth is it all matters tremendously." That line to me just seems to encapsulate kind of the theme of the series and like BoJack's search for meaning. Like, oh my god. So that's not really a question, just kind of like, I love that line. But
Thank you. I'm pretty sure that's a Raphael line. Whenever you have a character talking about nothingness, it's probably Raphael Bob Wexford. And I think you're right. I think that is a theme of the show for sure. What ultimately matters.
Mm-hmm. Because then, of course, that leads into The View from Halfway Down. And so even in this episode, though, like with how he realizes the weight of how he could have helped Herb all along. So it's just really heavy and intense, but just so wonderfully executed. The last shot of that episode, too, is just so chilling with BoJack watching the old Horse and Around screen test. And then we see Herb saying, "Buckle up, buddy, your life is about to start." And then shuts off the TV, and then we just see that grim image of BoJack with dark circles and just like this hopeless, fearful, crestfallen, all of these things. So it's just so chilling and just wow. Oh my god.
Yeah, so much of BoJack comes from visual ideas in the writing room. I know that was a really early one. I'm forgetting if that was Raphael's from the start. I mean, let's just say it was, that he wanted to end on this like young BoJack, and then flip to this, what he looks like now, like this beaten down, hopeless shell, and how kind of sad that juxtaposition is. But yeah, I mean, there's a bit of a Citizen Kane grandness to that episode, which is funny because when we first meet Angela and BoJack, it's supposed to be like the early 90s, the late 80s, and yet we're bringing in this sort of like gothic thriller of like 1930s and 40s sort of into that world, like with her big mansion, and the big fireplace. All these sort of like entertainment business lore sort of visuals is all stuff we kind of like talk about in the room and like pitch out, and I really love all that stuff. That last scene, with BoJack and Herb doing the scene over and over again, and he can't get it and he's nervous. Like, it was funny because working on a show about BoJack, like I told you, I worked on anger management for 3 years with Charlie Sheen, and there's a lot of parallels. So even writing that last scene was funny because it was like, oh, I know how to write these jokes, these like sitcom, these sort of stupid sitcom but funny jokes, rhythmic jokes. But his big coming together again with Angela, that was Raphael. That was on the board from the beginning of the season. He really wanted them to have a final interaction. She's the turning point, like if he were to tell you when did his life start going bad, he would tell you it's when he decided not to stand up for Herb on Horse and Around, and Angela's really the cause of that. And like we so often do in BoJack, we wanted to like flip it a little bit. So that's why we start with Angela in the offices of wherever she is, and she's dealing with misogyny and she's dealing with all these assholes, and then she sees the news about Herb and she's got to fix the problem or she doesn't have a job anymore. And we only kind of hint at it in the show, but it was talked about a lot in the room that she's gay as well. So by her firing Herb, it's like turning against her, her own community, but also something she can separate out because this is her professional life versus a personal one. And so there's we talk about all of it so much, and then it's like what gets in the script and what gets in the final show sometimes is very subtle. But yeah, I mean, that episode had to do a lot of things because, obviously in the next episode, we're in this kind of dream purgatory state where we're just in for reflection mode, right? Like there's no plot movement forward. And then the final episode, we're jumping ahead quite a bit in time. So the Angela episode is really the tie-up episode. You have to tie up all the storylines so that then you can say, okay, this is what happens in a year. So yeah, Raphael did an amazing job, like figuring all that out. We in the room, like it was a lot of conversations, and yeah, it's an interesting episode for sure. And you get Angelica Houston again, who's like, thank you. Like, putting her in my episode. Thank you so much.
That's so awesome. And so also just with BoJack in general, I'm just curious to know if you have a favorite line you contributed, just a favorite joke, just kind of your favorite personal contribution to the series.
My favorite contribution. Oh my gosh. I mean, I really did push for Judah and Princess Carolyn to end up together. That was really important to me. That line you just referenced with Ruthie, she's not that good at it or whatever. I mean, that was, I'm pretty sure that was me. I mean, it's hard to know, it's like you write these things and then that's the thing about TV is nothing's ever truly yours in the best way because it's a collaborative effort. But there's lots of things about BoJack I'm super proud of, and I think I grew a lot as a writer on that show. And some things are like a 1-2, like maybe I'll do a version of a joke, but it can be crispier, and then like another writer will come back with like a slightly better version of it, of an idea of a joke. And I kind of love TV for that reason. And it is a bit anonymous, like even though my name's on the script, I think a lot of people assume that every joke would have come from me. But I think like the wiser TV viewer understands that like this is a whole staff of people. So like my favorite joke on BoJack probably isn't even in one of my episodes. It's probably something I pitched out like in the first episode of season 6 or something. So gosh, yeah, it's hard to remember. It's also hard to remember episode to episode what you're pitching out and stuff. But let's see, Face Up Depression. Oh, this one's so stupid. It's not a good joke. But every time I hear it, I laugh. Oh God, I'm blanking on his name, which is so bad. What's Lenny? Turtle Top. When they're making the joke about recycling assistants versus trash assistants or whatever, and he says something like, sure, I'm green. I mean, so dumb, but I'm like, I cannot believe that made it all the way through. Because a joke has so many chances to die, right? Like, maybe you'll pitch it in the room, and then maybe it'll get in the script, maybe not. Then if it gets in the script, then Raphael has his pass on the script, so it probably will go away because Raphael has his own style of writing and telling jokes, and it's his show at the end of the day. So then if it makes it past Raphael's version of the script, then it has to make it through editing, which a lot of jokes get cut, like because we just have to make it to a certain time, like so many jokes in BoJack don't end up in the show, and then the scripts end up in the show, and then it has to go through like animation and the voice acting, and like you get notes from the network, and if any joke lives from like conception to like produced on air, it's kind of miraculous. So the fact that such a stupid joke made it all the way through, I think is pretty funny.
That's awesome. So I also just wanted to ask you what advice you have for writers in general. So that I guess I asked this when I talked to Allison too. So advice for when you are trying to break in, and then advice once you are in the industry.
I mean, this is advice that I didn't really take for a long time, and I wish I had, which is like all you can do is like the stuff that you have power and control over, right? Which for a long time is just your own writing. You should be writing every day, even if it's for nobody, even if it's just like jotting down an idea in a notebook. Like I'm still really bad at disciplined, timed writing. It's like a skill I'm still trying to learn. Like there are writers that I work with who are much, much better at it. So as much as you can exercise that muscle, so that it's like it doesn't matter if you're working on a staff or if you have an agent or you're writing a one-woman show that you're going to do at a fringe festival or like whatever all those things are. Like if you can develop some sort of habit to help you treat it less special, less rare, like less rarefied as a part of your life, that's what you should do. And I tell a lot of like assistants this advice, which is have your own thing going. Like on BoJack's a really good example. We have a really strong assistant pool on BoJack, and they're all writers. Rachel Kaplan got staffed on the show after being a writer's assistant for a few seasons. On this last season of Tuca and Bertie, I split a script with our writer's assistant, Chickadilly, and so those chances do exist. But oftentimes the showrunners will have an opportunity to staff, and they won't think to staff a writer's assistant or a script coordinator because they kind of already have them, and I think that's frustrating to those people, and I totally understand why. But I know like my last season of BoJack, Raphael staffed Johnny Sun, who was basically a Twitter comic, alternative like comic on Twitter and had published a book and is just such a sweet person and like philosopher, but has nothing to do with TV really. And then he staffed Minhal Baig, who is an indie film director and she had worked on one season of Rami, but also didn't have a lot of TV experience. And I think the reason he staffed them was because they had these kind of cool worlds going on that they had built themselves. You know, like Minhal just worked, she hustled to do short films and then to do a feature. Johnny made it his job to like do these tweets every day and published a book. And you know, so, and that's something that the internet allows us to do now. I mean, it sounds kind of silly, like, well, no duh, Shauna, but like, it's all about the consistency of it, right? So if you have one joke a day on Twitter, and it doesn't matter how many people follow you, if then Raphael is looking to see if you can write on a show, he's going to look down your whole Twitter feed, you know? And I say that, and I'm not on Twitter at all, so totally doesn't have to be Twitter, but like, what I did for a long time was storytelling. I ran a storytelling show. I would do them off every week. I would try to get on the radio. I had this thing outside of TV that was just mine because, like I've mentioned a few times, TV is incredibly collaborative. And in a way, it's not, unless you're the showrunner and creator, you don't get something that really is an expression of your voice very often. So it's really important to show what your voice is and to build that voice. And I think what Instagram and Twitter, TikTok, like blogs, anything does is allow that sort of channel, that stream of that without needing those gatekeepers. You don't need an agent to, you know, do certain updates like and weird pictures like or a weird comic every day, you know. But that's what ends up getting attention a lot of the time now. There is a sort of like equalizing that's happened. It doesn't matter if you're Seth MacFarlane or somebody in Idaho, you know, if you're tweeting or self-publishing something kind of in your voice or your point of view every day, people are eventually going to take notice. So you don't have to be just waiting on Hollywood to come knocking, which I think a lot of people make the mistake of doing because they're never going to. It's never going to. You know, you really have to make those. I do think like it's like when I got staffed on Anger, yes, it was because I was an assistant to Bruce, but it was mostly, I think, because I was doing the storytelling thing and I was inviting all the writers to my performances. And I think they were like talking to each other in the kitchen, you know, and like being like, Shauna was so funny last night. I didn't know that was the way she joked about stuff, you know? And so it's just about every opportunity you can take to show people who you are. Take it and be consistent with it.
My last thing I just wanted to ask you is if you have any show or movie recommendations, like anything you watched recently that you care to recommend.
Yeah, I just watched 40-Year-Old Virgin. It's on Netflix. Mm-hmm. It's so amazing. It kind of reminds me in style of like the Jim Jarmusch movies of like the 90s, but it's about a woman who's a playwright who's hit a wall, and it's just got really funny jokes in it, like really great dialogue. I just watched What the Constitution Means to Me, which is a Broadway show, essentially, is on Amazon for free now, and it's a woman's autobiography about how she used to do these competitions in high school where she had to know a lot about the Constitution, and she's now as an adult looking back on that, but also breaking down the Constitution in so many ways for what it has meant to her personally and what it means to our nation. And it's just really smart and really sweet. I love plays. I love solo shows, obviously, as like a storyteller person. What else? I just watched The Queen's Gambit, which everybody's watching, which I liked. I liked a lot of it. I don't know. Sometimes shows about like madness and addiction and all that are hard for me because, I don't know, just the fact that we tie those three things, genius and madness and addiction, together so often. I don't know. Anyway, but I think stylistically it's really beautiful. What else? I mean, John Oliver, we've just been watching every week because we have to stay sane right now. And I I mean, I had to catch up on Insecure this year just because I was way behind. That show is so brilliant. I love it so much. The friendship in that, the like core friendship, is such a beautiful relationship that has really grown and changed through the series, and you don't often get that between two women. Obviously, like Tuca and Broad City and girls and stuff, but I don't know. I really love Insecure.
Shauna, it's been such a pleasure chatting with you. Please let everyone know where they can follow you on social media and anything else you'd like to promote.
Yeah, I'm basically not on Twitter, but you can find me there and on Instagram at Shauna C. McG. I'm on Instagram a little bit more. As far as like where you can see stuff, I mean, I'm really excited for the new season of Tuca Bertie to come out. If you never saw Katie Keene, I wrote on that last year. It was a really wonderful experience with a lot of really good performers in it, really beautiful songs, like really fun musical numbers and costumes, just like a gorgeous candy dish of a show. I think you can see it on HBO Max. Yeah, and I mean, there's stuff happening, there's stuff cooking, but nothing really yet. So, yeah, thanks so much for having me. This was fun.
And with that, that is going to conclude this week's episode of Storytelling Saga. You can follow the podcast on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Be sure to check out storytellingsaga.com and feel free to send me any questions, comments, or writing prompts by emailing me at storytellingsaga@gmail.com. Next week, how about a third interview in a row? I will be interviewing artist Sam Kays. She's worked on many animated shows, including doing background designs for Invader Zim Enter the Florpus, so I'm really excited to chat with her. Until then, thank you for listening, and remember, write what you love.